Hey everyone, today's video is extra special. I put together a Christmas compilation of 45 of my favorite DIYs made with mostly Dollar Tree supplies. And don't forget to subscribe. I've got tons of new DIYs coming your way. So I headed to Dollar Tree and I grabbed several of their wooden Christmas trees. And I'm going to be using a total of 5 for all of today's DIYs. I also grabbed a couple of their 12-inch 1x2s. I'm going to stain the wood using acrylic paint, and I'll be mixing Territorial Beige and Khaki from Apple Barrel. And to thin out the paint so that it does go on like a stain, I add some water and then I mix it up. So I brush that on all over, and I'm just using a brush to apply that. And then I wipe it down immediately with a paper towel before it dries to remove any excess paint. And then I turn it over and I do the same thing on the other side, just brushing on that paint mixture and then wiping it down with a paper towel before it dries. For the 1x2s, I brush on the color as well, and then I wipe it down. I will be gluing these together side by side, so I do avoid applying the paint to the areas that will be glued. I glue the 1x2s together, so I just apply some glue on the sides, and I'm using wood glue, but you can also use hot glue or a combination of the two. I picked up the stencil pack from Amazon. It's a set of 12 with various Christmas patterns, and I love the designs on these. They're really nice. I will be covering the trees with the snowflakes, so I place a stencil on top. It's not going to cover the whole tree, but it looks like the ends do connect, or so I thought. So I'm going to do a section at a time. I just used some painter's tape to hold it down just to make sure it stays in place. I'll be using just plain white acrylic paint, so I dip my brush in the paint. And a very important step to make sure it doesn't bleed underneath the stencil is to dab out as much of the paint on a paper towel so that it's almost dry to the touch. So once I'm done with this section, I peel off the stencil and I move it to the other side. But no matter how hard I tried, I just could not match up the stencils completely. There were always just a few that just were not matching up. So instead, I just decided to stencil a few at a time until the incomplete snowflakes on the edge were whole. I also covered up any areas that I didn't want to get paint on. And then from there, it was very easy to finish stenciling the rest of the snowflakes on the tree. To cover up the hole on top, I'm going to place a wooden spar to cover it. And I just lightly brush on some white paint, and then I just hot glue that down. To glue the tree to the base, you can add some glue on the trunk area, and then just attach it towards the back center of the 1x2s, which was what I was going to do initially. But then I changed my mind and I thought it would look a lot better resting on top so that you can see the whole tree. So I just grabbed some 1x2s and I applied a combination of wood glue and hot glue on the bottom like so, and I attached that right in the back center. And then I applied some glue on the 1x2 and then I attached the tree right in front of that. To embellish, I wanted to add a little wreath, and I picked up this wired berry garland at Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use the whole thing just the way it is as my wreath. I like the way it looks, and it's already a perfect circle. So to attach, I will be using this little white hook from Dollar Tree. It has a sticky adhesive in the back, and it came in a pack of 12. So I hooked the wreath onto that first, and then I use that as my guide to determine where I want to place it down. I also picked up this adorable frosted berries and pine from Hobby Lobby. It was just under $1. It was 50% off. It's so pretty, and the frost, which are these really small clear beads, are not going to come off and make a mess. Next to that, I place a couple of these glass tea light candle holders from Dollar Tree, and I just place a couple battery operated tea light candles inside. And we are done, and I just love the end result. Dollar Tree has an amazing selection of Christmas gift bags, all with beautiful designs and classic prints. There are so many options for crafting with these. For the first project, I'll be using this large 18 by 13 inch gift bag. It has such a gorgeous design with the red cardinals and the poinsettias. I love the dark green background as well. I'll be making a little window frame with some Dollar Tree frame, and I thought these 4 5 by 7 inch wooden frames were perfect. Now these aren't actual real wood, but you can't really tell. I think they look pretty good, and I love the shade of the wood, so I'm not painting them. So I'm removing the backing board and the glass on all the frames. I'm placing the frames on top of the bag and adjusting them until I like the image and its position. I'm also propping up the bottom too slightly to avoid the crease in the bottom, and I'm just getting the idea of how I want it to look in the frame. Before I cut the images, I'm going to glue the frame together with 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. I'm just shifting them around until they fit nicely together. Sometimes one side can be a little crooked or uneven, so I'm just adjusting the frames until I get a good fit. It's kind of like a puzzle. I'm using Titebond multi-surface glue to stick the frames together because I wanted something strong, especially since I'll be putting the glass back in. And then I just clamp them until the glue dries. But unfortunately, I guess I didn't let it dry long enough because one section did end up coming apart on me. So I scraped off the dried glue and thankfully it came off pretty easily, and I switched it to E6000. And you know what? That felt way better and it felt super sturdy once it dried. Next, I'm placing the frame on top of the image and marking the part I want to use for each frame. And then I just trim it to fit. I also use the backing board of the frame as a guide to see how much I need to trim off. All I have to do now is put it right in the frame. First, I carefully put the glass back, and then I place the images down. And you just want to make sure you're putting them in the right frame. And then the backing board. You can definitely remove the little stand on the backs of each one just to make it look a bit cleaner, and I'll probably go back and do that. But this one is all done, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. And the best part is that you can totally swap out the images depending on the season. I'm going to make a couple snowy candle holder jars. So I get some jars. The small one is from Dollar Tree, and the larger one is an old pickle jar. I'll also be using some Epsom salt, which you can get anywhere, including Dollar Tree. You'll also need some Mod Podge, and satin or matte works just fine. I'm starting with a bigger jar, and I brush on the Mod Podge all over. You'll have to work fast because you don't want it drying out. But if it does, it's fine. Just go over that section again. And you'll want to apply a good amount, making sure not to miss any areas. I'm also avoiding applying the Mod Podge around the top rim because I will be adding something else on that area. So once that's completely covered, I grab a generous amount of Epsom salt and I sprinkle that over the jar, wherever the Mod Podge was applied. And I just keep sprinkling that until the jar is completely covered, and then I set that aside to dry. I do the same thing with a smaller jar, applying the Mod Podge all over as well. Because of the smaller size, this one was definitely easier to do. Then I just sprinkle on the Epsom salt all over the Mod Podge area. Now after it is dried, if there are any areas that didn't get covered or you missed it, you can go back and dab a little more Mod Podge over those areas and then sprinkle with the Epsom salt. So I just set that aside to dry. Once it's dried, I'm going to wrap some jute string around the top of the jars. The jute is from Dollar Tree, and these were slightly thicker than their usual ones. I'll be using a lot of hot glue to hold this in place because of the glass threads of the jars that's protruding out. So I do use a lot of hot glue to hold it in place and keep it from unraveling. Now you can also tie a little ribbon with the jute string before adding some embellishments. I'm going to glue some Christmas greenery on the jars right on the top. So I use a little hot glue to hold it in place, and then I top it off with a little wood slice. And I got a pack of these at Dollar Tree. Now I love it just like that, simple and rustic, but you can definitely add some mini pine cones and berries and a little ribbon as well. I drop in some mini battery operated tea light candles, and the simple and charming DIY is done. I grabbed 4 of these wooden pallets at Dollar Tree, and these are about 4 by 6 inches. They do have a slightly larger pallet. I didn't think about it until I was done with this project. They're called hanging wood fence, and they're about 5 by 7. So if you want to make a larger version of this project, you can get those instead. I'm going to glue these together, but before I do that, I want to add some color. I'm going to mix together khaki and territorial beige from Apple Barrel. I really love mixing these two together because you get such a beautiful, warm, earthy beige color. I want it to go on like a stain, so I add some water to thin it down. So I brush the mixture on top of the palettes and then I wipe it down before it dries. I really love using acrylic paints to make stain because not only is it cost effective, but you're also not dealing with harmful fumes. Since I will be gluing the palettes together with 2 on top and 2 on the bottom, I make sure to avoid applying the stain on the areas where I'm going to glue. To glue, I'm going to be using wood glue. I get these at Dollar Tree, but you can definitely use your glue of choice. So I apply the glue on the ends and then I push them together like so, and I'm just using a little wood block just to make sure that the ends are flush. And then I glue the other 2 the same way. And then I apply glue on the long sides of the 2 that were glued together, and then I bring everything together. To make sure the joints don't snap apart, I'm reinforcing with some popsicle sticks, and I'm just using hot glue to bond them together. I do make sure to place them in areas that's not going to be seen on the other side. So I apply the popsicle sticks vertically and a couple horizontally as well. Once everything is dried, I'm going to do some stenciling. I got this 11-piece Christmas stencil pack on Amazon, and I'm going to use the snowflake one with the word Merry Christmas in the center. I like this pack because these stencils are quite large. I'll have it linked in my description box below if you want to check it out. I'm going to paint them using a couple chalk paints, white and the shade Crimson from Waverly. First, I'm going to cover up Merry Christmas because I'm going to paint that a red, so I use some painter's tape to cover up that area. To apply the white chalk paint on the snowflake, I do make sure to dab out as much excess paint on a paper towel that's on the stencil brush, and then I apply it in circular motions. Now, I don't really mind it not being completely opaque in the application because I do want some of that wood showing through underneath the snowflake. So once I finish applying the white chalk paint, I'm going to switch out the painter's tape, and I'm just going to cover up the edges of the snowflake. Before applying the crimson red on Merry Christmas, I do make sure to dab out as much excess paint that's on the brush. And this will help prevent any bleeding underneath the stencil. And then I just apply it over Merry Christmas in circular motions. This time I do want it to be completely opaque. Now I think these palettes make a beautiful frame for Christmas decor, and really stenciling is just one of the many ways you can craft with it. Once I'm done applying the paint, I remove the stencil and this DIY is done. You can embellish with some greenery and bows, but I really love it just like that. Dollar Tree has some of the cutest Christmas gift bags this year. Just look at all these beautiful options. It's honestly hard to just choose one. Now I'm really loving their scenic Christmas designs and the large detailed landscapes. They're so beautiful. I knew I had to frame one for my Christmas decor. Any of these would look so beautiful framed, and I decided to go with this design with a cozy little house and the snowy outdoors. I found this large frame at a thrift store a while back, and I just knew it was perfect for this project. It's a good size, so I'm going to give it a quick Christmas makeover. I'll be using Rub and Buff in Gold Leaf, which is quickly becoming one of my favorites for Christmas projects. It gives such a beautiful rich gold finish. Next, I flip the frame over to remove the backing board and glass. I'll just set those aside for now so I can focus on the frame itself. I really love the carving details on this frame. It's so beautiful and elegant, but honestly, the details kind of get lost with this color, so I'm going to bring them out a bit more and give it that nice antique look to make those carvings pop. So I'm applying the Rub and Buff with a sponge brush to give me more control. I want to really highlight the carving details. The frame's dark color will make those recessed areas stand out, while the gold adds a beautiful antique touch to the raised details. I'm also making sure to apply the gold wax to the outer and inner parts of the frame. But I'm not worried about getting full coverage on the sides. I'm focusing more on the carved areas and the front, where the gold will really highlight the details. Now to get to those hard to reach areas, I'm also using a small brush, and that really does a great job of getting into the nooks and crannies and the narrow areas. Once that's done, I just set that aside to dry. Next, I'm cutting out the part of the design that I want from the gift bag. And I'm going to be using the side without the bottom crease. Once that's cut out, I place a backing board right on top, and I'm creasing the top and bottom areas to mark where I need to cut. Now the print is all ready to be framed. First, I turn the frame over, carefully placing the glass back in. Then I place the picture on top. Finally, I add the backing board to secure everything in place. And that's it! I'm so happy with how it turned out. The frame looks stunning, and the gold accents really bring out the intricate details, giving the whole thing that timeless vintage Christmas charm. I bought this handbell at Dollar Tree. It rings nicely, and I couldn't wait to give it a rustic Christmas makeover. I'm going to spray paint it black, and I'm using Rust-Oleum's paint and primer spray paint. I thought it looked really nice just plain black, and it still rang nicely, but I am going to continue on to give it that rustic makeover. I pulled out several of my favorite metallic paint that would give it that rustic finish that I wanted. I'm starting with Craftsmart's metallic paint in espresso, and I'm using a paper towel to apply the color, which I crumple, which will give it a rustic, worn out look. So I'm just lightly pouncing the paper towel on the different areas of the bell, including the handle. Now, I will say, I really love how this color looks. Honestly, you can just use this metallic paint on its own. It gives a beautiful, rustic, bronzy finish. But next up, I'll be adding this lighter metallic paint. This is titanium gold from Anita's. I believe I got this at Hobby Lobby. It was on clearance, so I'm really not sure if it's still around, but you can use other similar shades. But with that said, out of these three, this is probably the one I used the least amount of. And finally, I'm adding in Folk Arts Antique Gold, another beautiful color. So I just dab it onto various areas of the bell, alternating between the different paints until I'm satisfied with the appearance. It's a really easy, straightforward process, practically foolproof because the paper towel does most of the work for you. I also make sure to apply the paint on the inside of the bell. Wow, look how amazing this looks. What a transformation from that green bell. Now I do like it just like that. It makes a beautiful accent decor piece, but since it's Christmas, I thought I would add some holiday embellishments. I'll be using some things that I pulled out from a holiday bouquet and some jute twine. So I'm just gluing some berries onto the pine. And I'm just adding a little hot glue in the back of that to attach it onto the bell. It's not really a permanent hold. You can easily peel off that hot glue, which is nice because after Christmas, I'm definitely going to keep this gorgeous bell out. And then I'm just taking a little jute string and tying a little bow on top, which turned out really nice, but of course I ended up switching it out with this beautiful lace ribbon from Dollar Tree. And we are done, and I just love how this turned out. Okay, for the first challenge, I'll be doing a frame makeover. I found the perfect frame at the thrift store. It was about $3. They have so many unique frames, and I'm mainly focusing on the structure and texture. I chose this gorgeous ornate frame with lots of intricate details and a nice weight to it. It's quite heavy, which I really like. I'm going to give it a gold finish, which is perfect for Christmas, using Rub & Buff's wax metallic finish in the shade Gold Leaf. So first I turn the frame over and carefully remove the backing board and glass. To apply the wax, I'm following the instructions, putting on some gloves, and making sure I'm in a well-ventilated area. I'm using my fingers to rub it on, but you could also use a soft cloth if you prefer. A little goes a long way with this wax, as you can see here. It goes on opaquely and it gives off a nice smooth finish. And the more that you rub it in and buff it in, the more shiny and glossy it gets. One thing I really love about this wax is how easily it glides on. Now I'm using a small brush to get into all those little details, especially in the corners and edges. The texture of the frame really pops with the gold and it's starting to look so beautiful already. I'll be adding some Christmas-themed prints. I have this pack of decorative scrapbook paper. This one's from Hobby Lobby, and I really love this beautiful dark Christmas print. I thought it was just perfect against the gold. And so I just trimmed that to fit, and I placed that back in the frame. You can definitely place any print you prefer. You can also check out some of Dollar Tree's Christmas cards or their gift bags. They have really beautiful patterns as well. So this one is done. It was such a quick and easy makeover, and wow, what a transformation. For part 2 of the frame challenge, I picked up a couple of frames from Dollar Tree, so a total of $2.50 for the frames. I was hoping to find one with some nice decorative details, but there really wasn't much to choose from, at least not on the day that I went. But I did get this white 4x6" frame with some beaded detailing on the outer edge, as well as this classically simple white 8x10, and I'll be gluing these two together. So first, I'm removing the backing board and the glass. The frames are plastic, and I'm removing the black metal tabs on the larger frame, and I just used some pliers to pull those out. Since the frames were lacking in some details, I decided to use Dollar Tree's puffy metallic stickers. I'll be using the corner pieces and gluing them right in the corners of the beaded frame. So I'm just really pressing that on there. Now once I did get them all on there, a couple of them did start lifting in some areas. The surface isn't completely flat. There is a little lift. So I did go back and apply a little bit of E6000 on the edges of the sticker on some of them. But I love using these stickers. It's a really nice hack. It definitely elevates the frame and gives it more of a vintage look. I'll be gluing the smaller frame on top of the larger, and it just barely fits right on top. But just to make sure that the frames don't slide around while the glue is drying, I'm gluing down some blocks along the back corner of the smaller frame. With the smaller frame still face down, I apply some E6000 along the edge. And then I place the larger frame facing downward on top of the smaller frame. And it just about fits. Now you can leave it as is. It looks gorgeous just like that. The stickers really don't look like stickers at all, and it adds such a beautiful subtle detail. Just pop in some Christmas prints and it's ready to go. So continuing on, I'm going to apply Rub and Buff in the shade Gold Leaf to the frame to give it a rich gold finish. So with the glove, I'm applying a small amount on my finger and buffing that on the frame as well as on the decorative stickers. Now another quick option, if you don't want to use Rub and Buff, you can also spray paint it a nice gold metallic color. So I just keep rubbing in the gold wax, and the more that you buff that in, the more shine you get. To reach all those intricate detailed areas, I use a small brush which really helps work that wax into every nook and cranny. The brush makes it easy to apply the wax in those hard to reach spots where my fingers might miss. Once it's completely dry, I decided to apply a bit of antique wax to add more depth and dimension to the piece. It was looking a bit flat, so I apply a good amount of the antique wax on top of the decorative stickers, along the beads, and on the corners, and just here and there. I really like how the antique wax settles nicely into the grooves and details. And then I'm just taking a little cloth and buffing down the wax. If I take out too much, I just apply more of the wax and let that sit for a bit and then gently wipe it down. I'm also using a little sponge brush, and that really helps in blending the antique wax nicely. Once it dries, I place a Christmas print in the frame, and this one is done. So here are the two versions. They're both beautiful, but I'm gonna go with the thrift store version on this one, but let me know which one you like the best. For the next DIY, I'll be using a couple of these canvas gift sacks. They have numerous designs, and I really like the way they look, and so I grabbed the red snowflake and the green Christmas tree. They come in a pack of 2, which is really nice, and I'll be using one of each, and the other 2 for another project. I'll be turning these into some hanging signs with some wooden paint stir sticks. I'll be removing the drawstring on top because I won't need those. I'll be attaching the paint stick to the top and the bottom of the sack, so I just measure how much I need. Now they're not all equal in size. One sack was slightly wider than the other, so I want to make sure to measure that accurately. But before cutting the wood, I'll be trimming off a bit of the top of the sack to make it lay flat. The top edge is a little bit thicker because it's folded, and now I do the final measurements. I make sure to go a bit wider for a little overhang, then I trim it down using a miter box and saw for a clean cut. Next, I'll be staining the wood with some gel stain in walnut by Deco Art. I'm using a small cloth to apply the stain, rubbing it in to get an even finish. I really wanted a darker, rich tone for this because it adds warmth and it just makes it look more polished and cozy. It's really a nice contrast against a light canvas fabric. If you prefer something lighter or softer, you can go with a golden oak stain or a gray wash, which would give it that weathered farmhouse look. Or you can paint them a solid color as well. Once the stain is on, I'll let it dry completely before attaching the paint sticks. I'm applying a line of hot glue along the back edge of the wood and carefully pressing it into place at the top of the fabric. Once that's secure, I do the same thing along the bottom edge of the canvas, making sure everything lines up nicely. Now I did give the fabric a quick ironing, which makes it look so much smoother and more polished. It's a small step, but it really makes a difference. And look how beautiful these are looking. The final step is to attach some jute string to the back. I'm gluing the opening on the back shut to close it off. I'm also tucking the string in, and this will give the back a nice finished look. In hindsight, I kind of wish I'd stained the back as well, so if you're going to try this, definitely consider doing that. I think it'll make the back look even better, even though it's not going to be seen. And this DIY is done. Let me know what you think. Dollar Tree has so many beautiful Christmas flowers and greenery, and I'm going to be making a little hanging Christmas swag using these adorable pine stems. I really like these, and they just look like they've just been picked from the snow. I'll be using about 3 to 4 of these, but you can definitely use more for a fuller swag. So first, I'm going to gather the stems, varying the heights so it kind of has a tier shape. I grabbed some nautical rope from Dollar Tree, and I'll be wrapping it around the stems. I use some hot glue to start it off and to hold it in place while I wrap. Before I finish and secure the ends, I take some jute twine and I use that to make a little loop, which I glue in the end, and this will be the hanger. I just finish it off with more hot glue to secure it in place. I thought I would add these frosted berries from this holly berry bouquet from Dollar Tree, so I just cut those out and I place a few of them on the greenery. I wasn't completely sure yet if I wanted to keep them or go without, so I didn't glue them down just yet. I place a bow right where the rope and the pine meet, and this ribbon is also from Dollar Tree, but I did get it last summer during their patriotic season. And then I add a few more pine needles above the bow, and the simple swag DIY is done. Now, if you want to create a swag with a bit more elegance and style while keeping it budget friendly, you'll like this next one. I picked up some Christmas picks at Hobby Lobby. Their Christmas items were 50% off, and the quality is just a notch better. I thought either of these would make an adorable little swag, but I thought I would go with this pine spray. I really love the color, and I think I paid just under $2 for one at Hobby Lobby. I'll be using 2 for this one, but you can certainly add more. So like the first one, I gather them together, making one a little higher than the other. I wrap the nautical rope around the stem. You can use hot glue to start it off, and some in between the ropes here and there to hold it in place. Before I get to the end, I make a little loop using some jute twine to make a hanger. And then I secure the ends with hot glue. I'm going to add a couple of these rustic gold bells. I got these at Hobby Lobby and they came in a pack of 6, and they were also 50% off. To put them together, I gather them together, placing one a few inches higher than the other, and then I wrap some jute string over the area where I'm holding them together, securing with some hot glue. And this will make that area look seamless. Now after looking at it, I decided I didn't want that nautical rope to cover the whole stem. I wanted some of it showing through, so I took it off and rewrapped it, leaving some of the stems peeking out. I also make sure to reattach the loopy hanger before hot gluing the ends. To attach the bells on the stems, I string through some jute string. These were actually a little thinner than the ones I use on the bells, and I tie them around the nautical rope, keeping in mind where I want the bells to hang. I want to add these pine cone picks from Hobby Lobby. It was a little bulky, so I pulled it apart from the stem, and I just place it right behind the bell rope, and I also secure it to the stem with some floral wire. I add some more mini pine cones, and I think these would have also looked nice if I painted a little white on it. And then I added some berries as well. I wanted to add a bow, and I had a couple satin ribbons that I wanted to try out. I really couldn't decide which one, so I tried both. These are from Walmart and they're in the colors antique white and red wine. And this adorable little swag is done. I'm going to make a simple wreath. I'll be using this wooden tree shape as well as this brass wreath ring from Dollar Tree. I decided to stain the tree with this water-based stain from Behr in the shade Special Walnut. So I just apply that with a cloth, applying the stain all over and then wiping out the excess. I'm going to add some stenciling on the tree. This is also from that stencil pack I used earlier, and I'll be using the snowflakes pattern. So I tape it down and I cover up the areas that I don't want to get paint on. I dip my brush in the paint and then I blot out the wet brush on a paper towel before applying it over the stencil. Now my initial plan was to stencil a row of the snowflakes towards the center of each triangle section. But unfortunately, for the second row, I didn't line it up where I initially meant to line it up. I was way off, and I realized that not too long after I started applying the paint, so I decided to just go with it and somehow make it work. So for the top row, I decided to just place one snowflake on top, making it like a star for the tree, and it worked out well. I'm going to add some Christmas greenery onto the wreath ring. While Dollar Tree had some really good options that would work well, I decided to use greenery from Hobby Lobby instead because many of their Christmas items like crafts and florals were 50% off, and some of the items that I got were actually even cheaper and of course better in quality than Dollar Tree. I got a couple of these pine and pinecone branch for the wreath, and I really love the look of these 18.5-inch branches. So to attach, I start by bending the stems of the branch to follow the curve of the wreath, and those do bend quite easily because of the wire inside. Next, I lay them in opposite direction and pushing them as close together as I'm able to. Then I take some wire jute cord and I wrap that around the center of the stem to hold the two together. And then I cut out some more of the wire jute cord. These are from Dollar Tree and I use them to attach the branches onto the ring. Now I ended up redoing the center because I realized I should have also wrapped that area around the ring directly instead of wrapping more wire cord over it, which would have just made it more bulky. So I just continue securing the branches onto the ring using the wired cord to attach it. I'm going to add a bow in the center and I'll be using this beautiful red and white ribbon from Dollar Tree to make one. I got this last summer during their patriotic decor season and I think it's just perfect for this time of year. To make a bow, first I determine how long I want my tail to be, and then I gather it on the top like so, and this will be the center of the ribbon. Then I form a loop bringing the ribbon towards the back center and pinching them together. I move the tail to the side, and then I form another loop on the opposite side. Then I twist the ribbon, making another loop, gathering it towards the center, then twisting it again, forming another loop on the opposite side and gathering it in the center. And then I form the smaller center loop like so, and then I just take a floral wire, you can also use a zip tie or pipe cleaner, and I slide that through the small center loop, and then I twist it in the back to secure. There's a bit of excess wire in the back which I will use to secure it onto the wreath. And then I just clean up the ends of the ribbon and then I secure it in place. To attach the wooden tree, I just loop some jute string right through the top hole, but before I do that, I decided to wrap some jute string around the top, about a couple inches in width. To hang, I tie the wooden tree to the top of the wreath, and I string through wooden beads and I tie the ends of the string to make a loopy hook. And this DIY is done, and I am absolutely loving how it turned out. For this DIY, I'll be making a little table centerpiece, and I'll be using 3 of these Dollar Tree wooden crates. Now this part is optional, but I'm going to add some color, and I'll be painting it in the shade Territorial Beige from Apple Barrel, thinned out with a little bit of water so that it goes on like a stain. So I apply that on the crates, and I'm just using a brush, and then I wipe it down right away. The color is going to dry much lighter than what you're seeing because it was thinned out with water. But you can definitely paint it any color, a darker stain, or even red for this time of year, or leave it as is. You really can't go wrong with whatever color you choose. You can glue these together permanently, but I'm actually not going to do that. I'm just going to push them together so that it's one piece with the option to keep them separate. I'll be using 3 of these battery-operated wax pillar candles that I got at Dollar Tree. These are really nice, and because of the wax, they feel like real candles. I'm going to place them inside each of the crates. I'll be using these pine stems again, and I'm going to pull out the pine needles. I use about 3 stems or bouquets, but you can make this as full as you want. And I just tuck those inside the crates surrounding the candles. How easy is this? Now you can keep it simple just like this. Personally, I love it just like this. Or you can add some berries and pine cones as well. You can keep these together as one or spread them apart. Either way, this quick and simple rustic decor is beautiful. Project, I will be using this 11 by 5.5 inch MDF wood plank from Dollar Tree. I also trimmed a 2 by 12 inch wood plank from Dollar Tree so that I have 2 at 5.5 inches. I'll be staining the wood with this water-based stain in the shade Special Walnut. So I'm just using a piece of cloth to apply the stain all over the wood. I do avoid staining on the shorter sides because I'll be applying glue on that area. So once that's applied all over, I wipe out the excess, and then I apply the stain on the 5.5 inch wood. I got this 9-piece Christmas stencil pack on Amazon. They came with 9 reusable stencils, and I'll be using one that says Christmas Blessing. I'll be using this crimson and white chalk paint. So I place the stencil on top of the wood, positioning it where I want it to go. It's a large stencil, but it just about fits perfectly, and I secure it in place with some painter's tape. I'm going to paint the word Christmas in crimson, and I make sure to stir the paint completely first. I dip my stencil brush in the paint, and then I dab out the excess paint. You really don't want your brush to be soaking with paint. And then I go over the stencil in small circular motions. I take my time with this. It's best to apply in thin layers just to avoid paint from seeping underneath the stencil. So I just continue to apply the paint, making sure to dab out the excess paint before stenciling. I make sure not to go over the word Christmas. You can also just cover that up with some painter's tape. Once that's done, I remove the stencil, and that just went on perfectly. Now, I really love how the red paint turned out. It just complemented the wood and the white beautifully, and so I decided to paint the wood blocks red instead of that wood stain, so I just painted right over that. Next, I apply some glue on the shorter sides of the wood boards, and I glue a block on each side. And I'm just using Titebond Quick and Thick multi-surface glue. This glue works perfectly on wood. Before I move on, I'm going to seal the tray that I'm making. I'm using a spray sealer, but you can definitely use your sealer of choice. I'm going to make some handles using this nautical rope from Dollar Tree. So I cut out the size of the handle that I want, and I'm going to cut out 2 that are equal in size. I also wrap the ends just to make it look neat with some smaller jute string, about 1 inch in length, and I use hot glue to secure it in place. I run it through a candle lighter to remove the loose fibers and to also seal the ends, and that really made a difference. Then I attach the candles with some hot glue, 1 on each end, making sure they both go on evenly. And this adorable Christmas tray is done. DIY, I'll I'll be using a couple of Dollar Tree's cylinder vases. They have about 3 different sizes, and I'll be using the 7¼ inch and the 10½-inch ones, which by the way was $3. I'm going to share some quick and fun ways to decorate these for fall or even Christmas using just a few Dollar Tree supplies. So for the supplies, I'll be using several packs of these faux acorns from Dollar Tree. I grabbed a couple packs of the red and the dark brown ones, and they each came in a pack of 10. I'll also be using a couple of wired garland berries and 2 of these 5-inch LED pillar candles, all from Dollar Tree. Now I'm going to show you a few different ways to style these, and for this first one, I'm going to wrap one of the garlands around a pillar candle. Then I'll slide the candle out and drop the garland right into the larger vase. If you want it to look fuller, you can always add another garland, and I think that would look great too. But since I'm only using one, I stretch it out a bit so that it fills the space more evenly. That way it still looks full without needing an extra garland. For the smaller vase, I'm doing the same thing, wrapping the garland around the candle, and it coils really nicely. Since this vase is shorter, you can trim the garland down if you'd like, but I'm going to leave it as is. Then I just drop that into the smaller vase. I'm really liking how the vases are turning out so far. I just pop in the pillar candles and this one's done. To add a little extra, I'm going to drop in some of the acorns, mixing up the colors for a nice blended look. This is going to be the base that the candle sits on, so I am careful not to overfill it because I don't want that candle sticking out on the top. For the taller base, I add a few more berries to make the candle sit a little higher. And just like that, this one's complete. Now for the next option, I empty out the acorns and instead I push that coiled garland all the way down, letting the pillar candle rest right on top. I love how that looks too. You can definitely double up the garland in the taller vase to give the candle more height. It's super easy but adds such a nice touch. Now before we dive into the tier tray decor, I want to show you how to make a simple tier tray, and it's super quick. I'll be using a couple wood rounds. The larger 12-inch is from Dollar Tree and the smaller 7-inch is from Walmart. I'll be staining them, and I'm using a water-based stain in the shade Special Walnut. Unfortunately, these have a couple holes that I need to cover up, and I'm just going to use good old-fashioned spackle from Dollar Tree, and it does do a pretty good job in closing those holes up. Now I'm using wood stain, but you can easily paint your tier tray a solid color to match the season. Think warm, earthy tones for fall or red and gold for Christmas, so whatever fits your style. So I'm applying the stain all over the front and the back as well. I also make sure to get the sides, and I'm using a little paintbrush to apply the stain because the sides were a little rough. After the first layer, I thought it looked great, but I wanted the stain to be a little deeper, so I did add another layer. Now I thought the stain did a pretty good job in covering up the spackle. You can still see it just slightly, but I'm going to be stenciling over this, so it's going to be covered up even more. Now I was going to leave the rounds just stained, and you can, but then I felt like adding some stenciling just for fun. I'll be adding some white snowflakes, so I'm just taping the stencil down to keep it from moving. And these stencils are from Amazon, and I'll have that link below, and you do get a great variety of high quality stencils in the pack. When applying the paint, I do make sure to dab out any excess paint on a paper towel. It's always better to go lightly, applying several layers to prevent paint from getting underneath. And because the wood is larger than the stencil, I had to reposition it several times. It takes a little patience, but the end result is definitely worth it. The small round was undoubtedly a lot faster to stencil over. So again, you can skip the stenciling. I know a lot of it is going to be covered up anyway, or you can just add a few in there instead of covering up the whole round. I'll be using these wood dice from Dollar Tree and gluing them in between the rounds. I will be painting them this beautiful crimson color from Waverly. But before I do that, I'm going to glue the dice together first, and this will just make it a lot faster to paint. I'm using wood glue from Dollar Tree, and this will hold it together very well. especially since I'm not using any screws on this one. So I'm just brushing on that crimson color. It's really such a beautiful deep warm red. Now I am avoiding adding the paint on the top and the bottom because that's where the glue is going and I want a strong hold. Okay, so this is completely optional, but at this point, I thought it would look even better if I elevated it and I added some feet to the tray instead of just resting it on the surface, as well as a topper, which I'm gluing 2 dice together for that. So I am adding a total of 5 more dice to the tray and I paint them as well. Again, completely optional. I had this macrame kit from Dollar Tree a while back and I just never got around to it, and so I'll be using the little hoop, which I thought was perfect for the topper. And I wanted to slide on top of the block, so I'm just marking where to cut. And it does cut easily with an angled miter shear. These are really handy to have around, and you just want to make sure your cuts are parallel to each other. Instead of painting it crimson, I'm staining it that same special walnut stain. So now we're ready to put everything together. I turn the round over and I position the blocks so that they're equally spaced before gluing it down. And I just slide that trimmed hoop over the 2 glued dice and it fits perfectly. I add a little glue so it won't move, but this is purely decorative. You don't want to hold that tray up by it. And then finally, I glue the 3 stacked blocks in the center of the large round. I add some glue on top and I place a smaller round on top of that. And then I glue down the topper. And this one is ready to go. I'm so glad I added some feet to it as well as the topper. It really elevated it. I grabbed 3 of these 2x18-inch wood planks from Dollar Tree. I'm going to make a stain using a couple acrylic paints, Territorial Beige and Khaki from Apple Barrel. I usually like to add more of the khaki color and then a few drops of the Territorial Beige to darken. And then of course some water to thin it down so that it'll go on like a stain. So I apply the stain 1 plank at a time and then I wipe it down to remove any of the excess paint. I really love these 2 together. You get such a beautiful natural warm shade. Now I will be gluing these 3 planks together side by side, so I make sure not to apply any of the paint on those areas. Before I glue them together, I flip them over, and this will make sure that the surface will be nice and even. And then I apply some wood glue on the long sides. Once that's assembled and dried, I'm going to apply this Let It Snow stencil that I picked out from the stencil pack. Again, I will have that link below if you want to check it out. I'll be using crimson, red, and white chalk paint. I'm going to paint snow white and let it in red. And so first I want to secure the stencil on the wood, so I use some painter's tape to secure it in place. I'm going to paint Let It first, so I cover up the word snow. I load my stencil brush with chalk paint and I make sure to remove or dab out any excess paint. This is a very important step. And I just apply the paint in circular motions until it's completely covered. After that, I carefully remove the painter's tape and then I lightly press it over the word Let It. I really just want to cover up the edge of the word and I don't want to push it down too hard. And then with a new brush, I brush on the white chalk paint over the word snow. Now for the word snow, I don't really apply it on too thick because I do want some of that wood underneath to show through. Once I'm done applying the paint, I carefully peel out the painter's tape and then I remove the stencil and wow, it's so pretty. Now if these wood pieces were longer, I would have loved to stencil in that snowflake on top. But it's not, so I'm going to instead add some embellishments with these Christmas greenery from Dollar Tree. I cut out a few and then I'm just going to place them on the top right corner like so. I was going to add this adorable black and white ribbon from Dollar Tree to make a bow, but I changed my mind. Instead, I decided to go with just a few of these pine cones. I love the colors of these 2 together. It just gives it a natural, rustic farmhouse vibe. I also added a few berries as well. Underneath, I placed a wooden snowflake. This came in a pack from Dollar Tree, and I covered up the hole with spackle and I brushed on some white. And this Christmas sign is done. For the next DIY, I'm going to need 2 of these wooden trees, and I'm going to be making a 3-dimension tree out of them. I'm going to cut one of them in half, so I mark the center and then I score it several times with a utility knife. And it really doesn't take that long to cut because these trees are quite thin. To hide the holes on top, I'm going to cover them up with some spackle, so I apply a small amount and then I smooth it down. Now for the wooden trees that have been cut, I also add a little bit of spackle and I place a small popsicle stick on the side to keep the spackle in place. And then I give it some time to dry and harden. And the spackle covers up the holes nicely. I'm going to paint the trees in the shade Moss from Waverly Chalk Paint. It's such a pretty color. So I brush on the paint all over the wooden trees, the front, back, and sides. Now I'm only going to apply one coat of the paint, even letting some of that wood underneath to show through. For the half trees, I do try my best to not apply any of the paint on the sides where it's been cut, because I will be applying glue on that. Otherwise, you can also give it a light sanding. So once the paint has dried, I apply some wood glue on the cut sides, and I place that right in the center of the tree like so. I use a couple wood blocks to help hold it in place, especially since the wood is so thin and it won't stand up on its own. You can also combine with some hot glue, and that way you don't have to hold it in place for a few minutes. For the other half tree, I also apply the glue and I attach that to the opposite side. I also use the wood blocks to hold it in place. Now for more security, I'm going to add some skewers, so I paint them the same moss color. Now these skewers are quite thin. They're the ones from Dollar Tree, but I certainly could have gone with thicker ones. So I trim the skewers to the right size, and I also snip off some of that pointy tip. You can definitely sand the skewers down so that it looks nicely fitted. And then I just glue them in place. Now this part is optional, but to make a base for the tree, I'll be using some 3/4 inch square dowels, and I trim it and glue them together to form a cross for the tree to rest on. I grab a couple of these wooden stars and I trim one in half, and then I apply glue on the half side and I place that right in the center of the star. I add some glue on the bottom of the tree and I place that right on top of the cross. Now the tree needed some little friends and it looked lonely by itself, but instead of making more, I headed to Hobby Lobby and I grabbed this blank wooden tree craft kit. So I grabbed some neutral colors that I had on hand. For the larger tree, I'm giving it a coat of the lovely sandstone shade from Waverly. To speed up the painting process and give it more opacity, I'm using a round sponge brush. For the smaller one, I'm using the shade Espresso from Craftsmart, and this is their premium metallic acrylic paint. It goes on so beautifully and it has a little shimmer to it. For the last one, I'm using Khaki from Apple Barrel. So once the paint has dried, I connect the trees and they should fit in together smoothly. A few of the trees were slightly bent, which required a bit of extra effort to get them to snugly fit. Now the tips of the trees weren't as nice and pointy as I'd like, so I decided to wrap some jute string around the tip, which actually added a really nice detail to the trees. And we are done, and I couldn't be happier with the outcome. For the next DIY, I got 3 of these 5.5 by 7.5 inch wooden rectangles at Dollar Tree. I'm going to add some color, and I will be mixing together khaki and territorial beige from Apple Barrel and thinning it down with a little bit of water so that it goes on like a stain. So I just apply the color with a rag and then I wipe the color on all over, including the sides. I did want the wood to have a very light warm color, but any color will definitely work for this DIY, like a darker wood tone or white or even red. So after applying the color, I wipe it down to remove the excess paint so that you can see more of the wood underneath. I got this pack of decorative paper at Hobby Lobby. It was 50% off and the patterns are just so beautiful. This is the Winterberry pack. I really couldn't just pick one, so I picked out 3 and the colors just complement each other perfectly. I'll be trimming the paper to fit 3 of these 4 by 6 inch wood pieces. I got this on Temu, but you can also substitute these for those Dollar Tree wooden planks. I think those can work as well. So after trimming them down, I'm going to be Mod Podging them right on top of the wood. And I'm going to be doing the Mod Podge iron-on method. So first I'm going to apply a layer of Mod Podge over the wood. I just brush on a thin layer, but I do make sure every inch of the wood is coated. And then I just let that dry completely. Once it has dried, I place the decorative paper on top of the wood. I'm lining it up because I did cut it a little too perfectly. It would have actually been better to have a little overhang because you can easily sand off the excess. Next, I grab a piece of parchment paper and carefully lay it on top of the decorative paper. And then I get my mini heat press, but if you don't have one, you can totally just use a regular iron. Set your iron to a low temperature, then gently go over the paper. The heat will warm up the Mod Podge, making it sticky again and allowing the paper to adhere smoothly. The best part is that you don't have to worry about wrinkles. This method is amazing. To seal, you can do the same thing. Applying the Mod Podge on top, letting it dry, and then ironing it down. And then I hot glue each of the decorative paper onto the 5x7 inch wood. I'm going to glue the word joy onto the wood, and I got these 3 letters at Michael's. I wanted to keep it white and lightly outline the edge, so I just lightly dab some color, and I'm using khaki, and I just apply it with a small sponge brush along the edge very lightly. And finally, I hot glue down the letters on each of the wood blocks. And this adorable DIY is done. For this DIY, I grabbed a couple of Dollar Tree's Nutcracker soldiers. I grabbed one with a taller hat so that it looked like they were 2 different sizes. I'm going to paint these and add a little texture. So first I need to prime them with white spray paint. But before doing that, I need to remove the hair and the beard. Now the beard easily pops right out, but the hair on top of the head may need some tugging and cutting. One was definitely easier to remove than the other, but once you get that out, you're good to go. After spraying paint on them, I noticed that there was a gap or some spacing on the sides of the face, so I just added some spackle over that and then I smoothed it down. I'm going to paint them with some chalk paint from Waverly in the shade Sandstone. I'm also going to sprinkle a little bit of baking soda to thicken it up. And then I just brush on that paint mixture all over the soldiers. I do a couple of layers, but I did also like how it looked with just one layer. You can still see some of that white underneath, and it gave it a bit of a rustic marble look. After I was done painting, I did like how it looked, but it was looking a little too matchy, and I wanted a little contrast, so I decided to paint one in this celery color from Waverly chalk paint. So I just brushed the paint all over the shorter one. I didn't need to add any baking soda to the paint because there was already some texture from the previous layer. Now if you added too much baking soda and it's a bit too bumpy or rough, once it has completely dried, you can lightly sand over those areas with a fine grit sandpaper. I wanted to elevate the Nutcracker, and so I had some blocks on hand that I thought would be perfect. And I just trimmed them to the size I wanted, one slightly taller than the other. And I just paint them with the same paint that I use on the Nutcrackers, Sandstone, and Celery. I add some hot glue on the bottom, and I place them on the wood blocks. And this adorable DIY is done. I'll be using this Dollar Tree glass bowl for this project, and I was inspired by Pottery Barn's shiny brass bowl that had a gold and shiny color, and I love the simplicity of it. Like the first 2 DIYs, I'm going to add some texture to this. I'm just using white acrylic paint, and I'm going to add some baking soda to it, and I want this to be very textury, so I do add quite a bit of baking soda. So I just brush it on all over. I don't paint the bottom just so I don't have to worry about it getting on the surface and it's not going to be seen. But I do paint the inside of the bowl because it's quite a big opening and sometimes I may not put anything in it. So once the first layer has dried, I add another layer, and this time I add a little more baking soda to the mixture because I want it to have a lot of texture. Now I will be spray painting this inside and out, so I'm not really worried about areas that I've missed because once it's spray painted, you won't even notice it. But if you want to leave it as is, which is so pretty as well, you can just go over those areas with paint. So I take it outside and I spray paint it gold. I let that dry completely and I'm done. What a transformation. It's so beautiful and elegant and such a pretty piece. If you enjoy this. Now that I've created a tier tray, it's time for some fun. So I headed over to Dollar Tree to check out their Christmas ornaments, and they really have a nice selection. For the first one, I grabbed this adorable block hanging ornament that says Noel, and on a tier tray, I thought it would be perfect laying on its side. And I'm going to stencil in a word on the back side. I'll be using Dollar Tree's letter stencil, and you can find that in the sticker aisle. I was trying to think of another 4-letter word to put instead of Noel, but I just ended up going with Noel again. For the paint, I'm using Apple Barrels White and Tuscan Red. Because there isn't a lot of space to put the stencil on top, I placed a 1x2-inch wood next to it. It's similar in height, and that makes it easy to tape down the stencil and keep it from moving around. So as I'm applying the paint, I just make sure to remove the excess paint off the brush. I dab it over a paper towel. And so I just continue applying the letters over the blocks. Now I did get a little paint underneath the stencil, just a little bit, but I think it ended up giving the ornament a vintage stamp look, so you can make anything work. For the N, O, and L, I'm using white, and for the E, because the block is white, I'm using the Tuscan Red paint. Now I have this faux leather cord, which I got on Amazon, and I want to add a little bit of that on the tassel, just for a little contrast. So I just snipped off the amount that I need, and I'm looping that through the top of the tassel so that it blends nicely. And then I'm trimming off a smaller amount, and then I'm just wrapping that right under the head of the tassel to secure it. I want to change up that bow, and so I'm removing it, and instead I'm going to use this thicker leather cord to make a small bow. And I thought that would just tie it together with that faux leather on the tassel. So just use some hot glue to form it into a bow. On the back, I put a dot of glue right in the center, and then I just fold the sides in. I also cut a smaller piece for the center of the bow. And that's it. I'm not adding the tails. You definitely can, but I'm good with it. And this one is done. For the next round of my thrift store versus Dollar Tree challenge, I'm tackling canvases. So at the thrift store, I found this white stretch canvas for about $2, and it was 11 by 14 inch in size, which is larger than Dollar Tree's. It was also new and unopened, which was even better. Now I wanted to remove the canvas from the wood frame that it was attached to and reverse it, and so I'm just using a heavy-duty staple remover to separate them. And that makes it really easy to pry out the staples, and if it didn't pop out completely, I used some pliers to pull it out. Now you can also remove the canvas just by getting a utility knife and slicing around the staples, leaving that staple intact. Now I was a little disappointed to see some staples on the front corners, but these staples were so deep that I was able to cover it up with some spackle. I'm mixing a couple neutral colors together from Apple Barrel, Khaki, and Territorial Beige. And I just brushed that on the wood frame. The color goes on beautifully. It's such a warm, earthy tone. It also covered up that spackled area nicely. I make sure to cover every edge of the corner for a smooth, even finish, but I do leave the back unpainted. This shade really brings out that natural texture of the wood, giving it a soft, rustic look that's just perfect for this cozy Christmas decor. I'm going to lightly distress the frame and sand the edges and a few areas of the surface. Just very lightly, and I really like how that turned out. Now there are two sides of the canvas I could use for the background of the frame. One side was white and the other was a really pretty linen color. Both would work perfectly for what I had planned, but I decided to go with the white because I thought that would be a nice contrast against the wood. I did trim the canvas down to fit, and I'm going to apply a little bit of glue to the back of the frame. And I place the canvas down, pressing down the edges while also stretching and smoothing it out. I'm also going to staple down the canvas just to secure it even more because I'm going to be placing a wreath on the canvas. I got this really pretty flocked rosemary wreath from Hobby Lobby. A lot of their Christmas supplies are 50% off, and I believe this wreath was about $2.99 when I got it, which is a really good deal. I'll be using this little hook to attach the wreath to the canvas. I got this at Dollar Tree and it came in a pack. I'm going to stick the hook on the wreath and I just use a drop of hot glue to hold it in place. Next, I apply some E6000 and a little bit of hot glue to the back of the hook. I also make sure to peel off that backing paper since there is adhesive on the hook. Then I carefully center and press it onto the canvas. You can add a hanger in the back, but I'm going to lean this one against a wall and this one is done. For part 2 of the canvas challenge, I headed to Dollar Tree in search of their white stretch canvas, but unfortunately on that day, they only had the black one, so that's what I got. So I'm going to separate the canvas from the wood frame, so I remove the staples on the back. Now when I removed the canvas, there were some chips and cracks on the wood. It wasn't perfect, but I figured it just added to the rustic charm of the frame. I decided to switch the black canvas out with some popsicle sticks. And I'm using 6 large ones, and I usually get these at Walmart. They're the giant 10-inch ones. So I mark, measure, and trim the popsicle sticks down. I'll be gluing it on the back of the wood frame. So I cut it short enough just so that you can't see it from the front, but long enough to glue the ends on the frame. Next, I'm going to stain the wood frame with this gel stain from Deco Art in the shade Walnut. So I'm just applying the stain. I'm using a piece of cloth, and it goes on beautifully. The stain is a beautiful deep brown shade with a warm undertone. To get in the corners, I use a little brush and then I wipe it down. Next, I'm going to paint the popsicle sticks white, but first I'll do a quick wipe with a gel stain. I want a bit of that wood grain to show through the white, and the stain will add a nice contrast since the wood is naturally light. I'm going to dry brush some of that white paint over the stained popsicle sticks to give it a distressed, weathered look. So after the stain dries, I dip just the tip of my brush into the white paint. Now if there's too much, I make sure to dab it out. So with a light touch, I drag the brush across each stick, making sure some of that stained wood still shows through. This creates a rustic, weathered look without needing to sand anything down. The nice thing about dry brushing is that you can easily adjust the effect. There's really no wrong way to do it, and each one ends up with its own unique texture. Now that the paint and stain have fully dried, it's time to start attaching the popsicle sticks to the back of the frame. So I begin by laying out the popsicle sticks to get the spacing just right, arranging them so they're evenly spread across the back of the frame. Once I'm happy with the layout, I apply a small dot of hot glue to each end of the stick, and I press that down firmly. I work my way across, just gluing each stick down carefully so that they are aligned and secure. Once everything is glued in place, you can stain the rest of the back of the frame to match the front for a more cohesive look. Now that's done, I'm going to be placing a little wreath in the front. I'll be using this little grapevine wreath and some snowy pine greenery that I pulled out from a Dollar Tree bouquet. So first I'm going to glue the 2 pine picks together, one a little higher than the other, and I do 2 of those. And then I just tuck the ends in the wreath opposite each other. You can also secure it a bit more with some hot glue. And I'm going to add some more embellishments to the wreath. I'll be placing these 3 white pine cones in the center, and I'm going to kind of point them downward a bit because right above that I'll be placing a velvet bow. I also added a few more pines on each side just to make it look a little more full. I apply a little bit of hot glue on the back and I place that in the center of the frame, and this one's done. Let me know which one you like better. I definitely love the size of the first one, but I really love the wood background and the little wreath on that Dollar Tree wood frame. For the next DIY, I'll be using this wooden board from Dollar Tree. It comes with a rope and a metal ring, but for this project, I'm only using the wood board. I love the design on this gift bag. It has such a cozy, wintry feel with a cute cottage and snowy rooftop. It's so pretty. And I'm going to be using it to turn this wood board into a charming little tray. Now I'm going to be using the side of the gift bag with a crease because I only need a small amount, and I do want to save the other side for another project. So I'm going to cut out that side of the gift bag and place the board right on top, just above the fold. I'm tracing around the board to mark how much I need to cut. Then I cut it just slightly larger than the board to leave a little bit of overhang. To adhere the paper onto the board, I'm going to first apply some Mod Podge on top of the wood. I get these little bottles at Dollar Tree. They're so convenient to have, and I just love squeezing out the Mod Podge. I'm putting a good amount on top. I want to make sure it's completely covered, and then I'm just using a little sponge brush to spread it all over. After that, I'm going to let it dry completely. If you're in a hurry, you can speed up the process with a heat tool or hair dryer. It does dry pretty quickly. Once it's dry, I grab some parchment paper big enough to cover the wood, and then I place the image right on top, making sure it's exactly where I want it. After that, I lay the parchment paper over the image. I'm using my mini heat press to go over it, but you can totally use a regular iron. Just make sure it's on the low heat. The heat will reactivate the Mod Podge underneath, helping the design to stick to the wood. And with this method, you don't get any bubbles from the Mod Podge, which is pretty awesome. Alright, now that I've given it a little time to dry, I'm going to sand off the overhang. I'm just using my little mini sander or my finger sander, and I get these on Amazon and they're super handy. I'll drop a link below for these, plus anything else I've used in this video that I have a link for. You just want to sand it in one direction away from the board. I also wanted to sand just a bit more along the edges to expose a little of that wood. And this will give it a subtle border and it makes the graphic blend in with the wood nicely. And finally, I'm sealing the top with another layer of Mod Podge. Once it dries, the paper does stay nice and flat, so no ironing is needed. The final step is to add some legs to elevate and complete the look. I'll be using these wooden shapes from Dollar Tree. These are mini snowmen, and I always grab a bunch of these whenever I see them at Dollar Tree. They're just great for crafting. So I'm just gluing these on the back and then placing them over the holes on the corners. Now I could have covered them up or cut up some popsicle sticks to go over it just to give the glue something more to adhere to, but with that said, it still held pretty well. One thing you might notice about these boards from Dollar Tree is that they can be a little curved, but no worries, it's an easy fix. Just hot glue a piece of dense wood like this one over the back, making sure it's trimmed to fit, and hold it down flat until the glue dries. This usually straightens out the board and flattens it right out. And that's it. Now we have a cute little tray, perfect for Christmas. For this next DIY, I'm using a couple of Dollar Tree's cylinder vases. One is 6 inches tall and the other is 7 inches. I'll be painting the vases and using these tree silhouette stickers to create a lovely see-through effect, which will give such a cozy autumn feel that you can enjoy all the way through Christmas. Now I did cut these out on my Cricut, and I actually just uploaded the images from Canva, and I just resized them because I didn't want them to be all uniform. I'm using pine trees, but you can use whatever shape you like. Now I did cut these out on a Dollar Tree sticky vinyl using my Cricut, but you can also trace out some simple tree designs and cut them out with scissors as well. I'll be placing about 10 trees on each vase, and so I just peel them off and place them on the vase. I did mention that I didn't want the trees to be uniform, but I also didn't want the bottoms to be placed all on the same level. And so as I'm placing the trees, I just placed them in different heights, some higher and some lower, and I really liked how that looked. Now, since I'll be painting these, I did make sure that the vases were cleaned, free from grease or smudges. I did wash them with soap and water. You can also wipe them down with some rubbing alcohol. For the paint, I'm going with Waverly chalk paint in white, and I decided to mix in a few drops of sandstone from Waverly to give it a bit of warmth. The white alone is beautiful, but adding the sandstone gives it a very subtle, creamy tone that feels perfect for fall. You can totally customize this part depending on the look you're going for. I'm using a round sponge brush to apply the paint because it really helps give that great coverage and smooth, even finish that I like. The pouncing technique works well for this because it helps the paint get into all those little details, especially around the tree silhouette. You want to make sure every part of the vase and the tray is fully covered so that you get a nice crisp silhouette when you peel that vinyl off. I'm sticking with this soft, almost white color, but I think this would also look amazing in some rich fall tones, deep browns, burnt oranges, or even a mustard yellow. And if you're thinking ahead to Christmas, dark greens or burgundies would really make this pop. So many options to play with here. Alright, so once the vases are fully painted and the paint has dried, it's time for my favorite part, peeling off the vinyl. The vinyl comes off so smoothly, and I just love how that tree silhouette reveals itself underneath. Look at how stunning that silhouette is. It's such a simple process, but the result is really pretty, and it gives a vase a very cozy autumn feel. For the final step, I'm going to place some LED pillar candles inside to finish it off. You could also add some fairy lights or fill the vase with seasonal accents like acorns or pine cones for a different look. For this DIY, I'll be using 4 or so of these wood planks from Dollar Tree. These are quite long, they're about 2 by 18 inches. I remove all those sticker barcodes. I always like to take those out even if that side isn't going to be seen. I got 5 planks, but in the end for this project, I only ended up using 4. I'll be staining with that same special walnut water-based stain, so I just wipe on the color with a cloth. Now I'm going to be gluing the wood together side by side, so I avoid applying the stain in the areas I'll be gluing. I also make sure to pick the side of the wood that look best. Some sides look better than others, and if there were any sticky residue, I just made sure to sand it out. Then I arranged the wood so that they laid nicely side by side. Some of the sides were not completely straight, so I just arranged it as best as I can because I'll be stenciling on top of it. And then I continue staining the sides that will be seen. Before I glue them together, I flip over the wood so that the top surface will be nice and flat. And then I apply the glue on the sides of each wood and I attach them together so that they form one rectangle piece. And for more security, I glue a couple paint sticks on the back, and this will also help flatten out the wood if there were any areas that were a bit warped. So now this board is ready to be stenciled on. Now the stencil pack has numerous nativity scenes. I love the variations with different wordings, and I'll be using the one that says, "Oh, come let us adore him." I'll have the link to the stencil pack below if you want to check that out. I'll be using this white chalk paint from Faux. I secure the stencil with some painter's tape, and then I dip my brush in the paint and I make sure to dab out the excess paint. And then I just apply the paint over the stencil in circular motions, taking my time with it, applying in layers until I get the full coverage that I want. Then I remove the stencil and wow, it's really beautiful. I do make sure to seal it with a spray sealer. Now you can leave it as is, but I thought I would add a couple wood pieces on the sides going vertically. I was going to use another plank, but it was too wide, so I decided to go with paint sticks. I thought I would stain them with the same color, but then I wanted a little contrast, so I decided to dry brush some white paint, let it dry, and then sand it a bit with a coarse grit sanding sheet, and it gave it a beautiful distressed look. I'm not going to be hanging this, I'm going to lean it against the wall, but to hang you can use some jute rope or this jute wire. Before gluing the wood pieces, I wanted to see what it looked like, and I wasn't really sure if I liked it with or without the paint sticks, so you will have to let me know in the end which one looked better. But either way, this nativity sign is beautiful. For this DIY, I'll be using one of Dollar Tree's large 11.5-inch MDF snowflake. I'm going to stencil in some small snowflakes on the snowflake, and I thought this pattern was perfect. I get my stencils on Amazon, and I'll have this one linked below. I'm only going to stencil the ends where it branches into 3, kind of looks like a little arrow, and everywhere else I'm going to leave it as is. I start by placing the stencil in the area just right before it branches out, or the tip of the arrow, and I'm just using white acrylic paint. So I stencil that snowflake in, making sure to dab out as much of the paint as possible. Thin layers is a key to prevent bleeding. And then I apply that in circular motions with my stencil brush. I'm going to apply a full stencil all around the snowflake first, so 6 times. That way it gives the paint a little time to dry before stenciling around it. After that, I'm going to add some stenciling on the rest of the ends, whatever can fit on those narrow ends, just to make it look pretty. I'm going to embellish using these Dollar Tree snowy pine picks. I pulled out the pine needles from the stem. I'll be using about 6 or so, and I start by taking 2 and forming it into an L, and then taking some floral wire to tie the ends together. And I'm going to make 2 of these. Then I take 2 more and I tie the ends together so that it lays horizontally, and then I just attach them together so it kind of looks like a star. In the center, I'll be placing 3 of these little snowy pine cones. These have a wire in the bottom, so it was easy to attach on the pine needles. I add a few berries, and I place that in the center of the MDF snowflake, and I secure the whole thing with some floral wire. I attach a ribbon to hang, and this quick and easy DIY is done. Of the 12-inch 1x2s, which I got at Dollar Tree. Now they all need to be equal in size because I am going to be making a frame and I really don't want to trim anything down. So while I was at Dollar Tree, I just made sure that the pieces of wood that I got were all equal in size, and that will just save me a lot of time on this project. First thing I do is grab some paint colors, and I'm using Territorial Beige and Khaki from Apple Barrel. I'm going to apply it like a stain, so I just mix the 2 colors together, and then I add some water to thin it down. I use a little rag to apply it all over, and I make sure to wipe out the excess so that you can see the wood patterns underneath. For the tree, I will be painting it white, but since I want some of the wood underneath to show through, I rub on some of that stain color on top first. The natural color is so light, and it'll just end up blending with the white paint. So once that completely dries, I start brushing on the white chalk paint. I just do about a layer of it, not too heavy, and then I just put that aside to dry completely before I give it a light sanding. To make the frame, I'm just going to glue the 4 pieces of wood together to form a rectangle, with the 2 vertical sides glued in between the ends of the other 2. I use some painter's tape to clamp it and hold it together while it dries. I also use a carpenter's square ruler just to make sure that all the corners are at a 90-degree angle. After lightly sanding the tree, it's time to put everything together. The tree is slightly too wide for the frame, so I trim a tiny bit off the wooden tree. And then I turn the side of the frame that I like down with the back side up, and then I apply some glue on the areas of the tree that hits the frame. And then I turn the tree over and glue it in place. The simple rustic tree silhouette frame is complete, and I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. For the next DIY, I'll be using a couple of these canvas gift sacks. They have numerous designs, and I really like the way they look, and so I grabbed the red snowflake and the green Christmas tree. They come in a pack of 2, which is really nice, and I'll be using 1 of each, and the other 2 for another project. I'll be turning these into some hanging signs with some wooden paint stir sticks. I'll be removing the drawstring on top because I won't need those. I'll be attaching the paint stick to the top and the bottom of the sack, so I just measure how much I need. Now they're not all equal in size. One sack was slightly wider than the other, so I want to make sure to measure that accurately. But before cutting the wood, I'll be trimming off a bit of the top of the sack to make it lay flat. The top edge is a little bit thicker because it's folded, and now I do the final measurements. I make sure to go a bit wider for a little overhang, then I trim it down using a miter box and saw for a clean cut. Next, I'll be staining the wood with some gel stain in walnut by Deco Art. I'm using a small cloth to apply the stain, rubbing it in to get an even finish. I really wanted a darker, rich tone for this because it adds warmth and it just makes it look more polished and cozy. It's really a nice contrast against a light canvas fabric. If you prefer something lighter or softer, you can go with a golden oak stain or a gray wash, which would give it that weathered farmhouse look. Or you can paint them a solid color as well. Once the stain is on, I'll let it dry completely before attaching the paint sticks. I'm applying a line of hot glue along the back edge of the wood and carefully pressing it into place at the top of the fabric. Once that's secure, I do the same thing along the bottom edge of the canvas, making sure everything lines up nicely. Now I did give the fabric a quick ironing, which makes it look so much smoother and more polished. It's a small step, but it really makes a difference. And look how beautiful these are looking. The final step is to attach some jute string to the back. I'm gluing the opening on the back shut to close it off. I'm also tucking the string in, and this will give the back a nice finished look. In hindsight, I kind of wish I'd stained the back as well, so if you're going to try this, definitely consider doing that. I think it'll make the back look even better, even though it's not going to be seen. And this DIY is done. Let me know what you think. For the next super quick tiered tray craft, I grabbed one of Dollar Tree's buffalo check ornaments. I got the tree one, and I'll also be using some wooden beads and this faux leather cord. I'm going to string the beads through the leather cord, and I'm using about 26, but you can use more or less depending on how long you want it to be. Now, I get these on Amazon. You can get some at Dollar Tree. They do have some already strung through as well, but if you want more bang for your buck, they have some decent prices on Amazon. Okay, once all the beads are strung through, I'm going to tie the ends together and I just double knot it. I'm going to make a tassel with the leather cord, and so I'm just wrapping it about 10 times around this 4-inch piece of wood. Then I'm going to slide it out and cut a small piece of cord and tie a knot on one end of the loop. And then I cut a larger amount, about 10 inches or so, and I'm going to use that to form the head of the tassel. Now you can use a dot of glue to hold it down, but I'm not using glue here. I'll point that starting end upwards a bit, and then I just start wrapping over it, and then I just wind that about 1 inch up. And for the other end, I like to use a yarn needle to bring it under and through the wrapped cord, and then I pull that all the way down. I cut the bottom loops and trim the ends so that they're all the same size. Okay, back to the buffalo check star. I'm going to remove that little pine branch and pine cone, and I'm going to replace it. Now, I got this cute white berry and greenery pick at Michael's. It was 40% off, and I really like how muted the greenery was. So I'm just going to cut the pieces off, and I'm placing that right on top, and I just put a little hot glue to hold it in place, and I hot glue a small pine cone right in the center. I cut that jute hanger on top in half, and I use that to attach it to the garland. And before I attach the tassel, I slide the excess leather through the beads to hide it. Then I tie the tassel, I double knot it, and I string the excess through the several beads to conceal it as well. And then I decided to put a little jute ribbon on top of the star. And this rustic decor is done. For this DIY, I'll be using a couple of these wooden dangling snowflakes from Dollar Tree. Each come with 4 snowflakes, so 8 total. I'll also be using a pack of those smaller wooden snowflakes as well. I'm going to make a wreath with them, so first I separate the larger snowflakes. And I place them in a circle. I'll be using 6 of the smaller snowflakes, and I place them in between the larger, making sure the ends touch the larger ones. I'm using wood glue to attach them together, and I'm just applying glue on the areas that will touch the larger snowflakes. Once it is completely dried, I turn it over and I apply a little hot glue on the back, securing it even more. I'm going to cover up any of the visible holes with a little bit of spackle. I'll be dry brushing some white paint over the wreath, so the spackle will blend nicely. So I'm just dipping my brush in the white paint and then dabbing out the excess. And then I just apply the paint over the snowflakes, making sure not to go too heavy and letting the wood underneath show through. Now I thought it looked really nice with the white paint dry brushed, but then I changed my mind and I decided to paint everything white. So I just used a little round sponge brush, which made painting the whole wreath much faster. To embellish, you can add some berry picks, Or head to Dollar Tree's ornament sections. They have so many beautiful ornaments, and I'm going to be using this red and black Noel ornament. You can make a little hanger with some ribbon or twine. And this DIY is done, and I really love how it turned out. The next DIY is going to be a quick one. I'm going to make a tray, and I'll be using this blank wooden frame sign from Dollar Tree. You know, I really like turning these into trays because it's already painted for you. I think it looks great the way it is already. First, I'm going to remove the hanging string stapled on the back. I'm going to add some handles, and I'll be using these plastic handles that I've already had on hand. I'm going to spray paint them gold using Rust-Oleum's metallic gold paint. It really applies nicely not only to wood, but on plastic as well. I'll also be spray painting 4 of these Dollar Tree craft cubes, and these will go underneath the tray. So I take them outside to paint, and once that's dry, I flip over the sign and I glue the cubes on each corner. The handles are going to be more decorative than functional, and so I just glue those down with a little E6000. Now if you don't have handles, you can easily make handles with some dowels and craft cubes as well. You can also paint the wood frame to a darker color like red. I think that would look great as well. And this DIY is done. A while back, while I was at Dollar Tree, I saw that they had these metal gold leaf candle holders, and I thought it was just perfect to place their cylinder vase in. My only regret was that I only got one. I wish I had a pair. Now look how beautiful this turned out. I really like it. It's so quick and easy. You can definitely paint the candle holder if you like, but honestly, I really like it just like that with that warm gold finish. For the next gift bag DIY, I'll be using this dark green joyful bag. I really like the simple design on this, and I thought it would look perfect on wood. So I'll be using this 11 by 5.5 inch wood from Dollar Tree, and you can sand the wood so that you have a smooth surface. So I'm placing the wood on top. The full image is definitely not going to fit, so I just mark the area that I want on the wood, and I do add a little extra to that because I do want a little overhang, and then I cut it out. I'll be using matte Mod Podge to adhere the paper on the wood, and I get these mini bottles at Dollar Tree, and I'm just squeezing a good amount on the wood, and I use a little sponge brush to spread that all over. I really want to make sure I got the whole top surface covered with the Mod Podge, especially on the edges. Once I have that fully covered, I'm going to let that dry completely. You can also use a heat tool to speed up drying time. Okay, once that has dried completely, I'm going to place the paper right on top of the wood. Then I'm going to take some parchment paper and rip off a piece large enough to fit the wood and then lay it over the top. And this will keep everything protected while we add heat. So I'm using my mini heat press, but you can totally use an iron too, and I have it set to a low heat, and I'm gently going over the parchment paper, moving it around with light pressure. And the heat will reactivate the Mod Podge and bond the paper perfectly to the wood, and you get no bubbles and no wrinkles. I'm standing along the edge of the wood to get rid of any overhang from the paper, and this really helps clean up the edges and make the board look polished and neat. After that, I'm going back over the edges again and sanding a little bit more to let a bit of that wood show through. And this is going to add a nice little detail and border. I'm going to be applying some gold rub and buff along the sides and the edges, and I'm just using a small little sponge brush. You can also use your fingers or a soft cloth, and I'm applying the gold all over the sides. And this is such a pretty gold. I believe it's in the shade Gold Leaf. Now if you want the gold to go on smoothly, you want to just give the sides a little sanding. I'm also applying it to the areas of the wood along the edge of the paper where I sanded. And I'm taking a little of that gold and going just slightly over the paper, just a little bit. And I'm not being too straight or precise with it, and I like how that looks. You can go over the surface with another layer of Mod Podge just to seal everything in. You can add a hanger in the back or just lean it against the wall. And this one is done. We're moving on to vases. I found this super cute $3 ceramic vase with a lid at the thrift store, and it immediately caught my eye. I knew it would be perfect for what I had in mind. After washing the vase, I'm going to spray it with white primer, which will help the paint that I'm going to apply later stick better. I always end up loving how things look with a fresh coat of paint. So you can take any thrifted vase, spray paint it, and it's good to go. However, I'm going to give this one a rustic makeover. I want to add some texture, and so I'm just going to mix in some baking soda to some paint. I'm using white acrylic paint, but you can use any color you like. I want it to be thick, so I do add quite a bit of baking soda, but if you don't like that, you can always go lighter. So I'm just brushing that on the vase. Initially, I only wanted to apply a light coat here and there, and then go a little heavier in some areas just to add some depth and texture. But as I started applying it, I really liked how it was turning out, so I decided to go ahead and give it a full coat all over. It just seemed to look even better, and yeah, I really liked how it was looking. But of course, you can totally customize it however you like. Whether you prefer a lot of texture or a more solid finish, it's all about what you prefer. I brought out some of my favorite neutral paints that I already had, and I'm applying it with a damp piece of cloth. You can also use paper towel, that also works really well. And I'm just pouncing the paint onto the vase. I have a light neutral and a dark neutral, and I'm just going back and forth. And really, you can't go wrong here. As long as your cloth or your paper towel is damp, it's going to blend really well. So I started off using light neutrals. I think that was my original plan, just to keep it light, and you certainly can. You can definitely stop here, and it's perfect. But of course, I never really stick to what I usually originally have in mind. Once I get started, it always evolves into something else, usually something better. And so as I started adding in a few darker shades, I was just going to add a teeny bit and blend it out, but I actually ended up loving it all over. And so I brought out some darker colors like Cafe Noir from Hello Hobby. And I just blended that all over with a damp cloth. I also make sure to do the same thing on the lid. So after the dark, I went in with a lighter color linen from Faux, and that made it look even more rustic, and it gave it more dimension. Done, I let that dry, and then I seal it with a spray sealer. And I drop in a Christmas greenery, and this one is all done. So now let's move on to the Dollar Tree version, and I'm going with this glass flower vase. It's almost similar to the thrift store one, although it doesn't have a lid, and it's a bit taller and elongated. After giving it a really good cleaning, I'm spraying it with primer, and that will help the paint that I'll be applying stick better. I want to add some texture to the vase, so I'm mixing a bit of baking soda into some white acrylic paint. The baking soda adds a grainy texture, giving the vase a bit of that stone-like feel. And to add even more dimension, I'm dabbing the paint with a damp paper towel, which makes the texture pop even more. I'm mixing some neutral colors until I get this beautiful earthy taupe shade I like. Then I take a damp paper towel and dab the paint onto the vase. This technique creates such natural looking textures and patterns. I also use a wiping motion with a paper towel to apply the paint, and that creates a subtle rustic wash effect. And so I just vary the application. Now just make sure that the paper towel is damp, because that really helps blend everything together naturally. It's honestly foolproof. I could stop here, and it really looks good already, but I want to deepen the color similar to the thrift store version, and so I add some darker neutrals to the vase. Then for a little contrast, I dab in some lighter shades like Folk Arts Linen. You can also add some white to lighten any neutral color, and that just gives it that rustic stone finish. So this is a fun and simple hack to give any vase a rustic makeover. Super easy, and it looks amazing. Once it dries, I spray a matte sealer, and I drop in a Christmas stem, and this one's done. I really love how they both turned out, and they each have their own charm. But if I had to choose, I think I'm leaning towards the Dollar Tree version just a bit, but let me know what you think. Final DIY, I'll be using this absolutely adorable Dollar Tree gift bag with a cozy Christmas house design. I'll also be using this Dollar Tree wood round and this beaded wreath from Dollar Tree as well. So first thing, I'm going to trace the round, and I'm just going to make sure that I have the parts of the design that I want within the circle. Okay, so I'm just cutting out the circle, and I'm adding a bit more so that I have a little overhang. So I'm covering the whole surface of the wood circle with Mod Podge. I'm not being stingy with it either. I'm putting on a nice thick layer because I really want the entire surface to be covered completely. To spread it out, I'm using a round sponge brush, which works really well to get a smooth and even coat. I'm also going back around the edges and adding a little extra Mod Podge just to make sure I didn't miss any spots. You don't want any dry areas because that's how you get bubbles or peeling later. Get a heat tool or hairdryer to speed up drying time, and once that's dry, it's time to adhere it onto the wood round. I'm ripping out some parchment paper to fit on top of the round, and you can reuse these over and over again. I place a parchment paper right over the wood round. I'll be using my heat tool, but if you don't have one, no worries. You can totally use an iron on a low heat setting instead. I carefully go over the entire surface, making sure I don't miss any spots, especially around the edges. After that, I sand off the overhang with my little sander. I start by sanding all around the edge of the wood round, and the overhang just peels away super easily. If there are any areas that don't come off right away, I just go over them again until everything is nice and smooth. And this gives the edges a really clean, polished look. Next, I'm applying some hot glue on the beaded wreath, and then I place that right on top of the wood round. To spice it up, I'm using these glittered pine stems from Dollar Tree. Let me just say this thing is basically a glitter bomb. I grabbed these last year, and while the pine is gorgeous, the glitter was a little extra for me, but this year I'm all in and it's perfect for this project. I'm just bending the stems to follow the curve of the wood and then hot gluing them down towards the top opposite each other to keep it symmetrical. I'm going to glue about 3 stems on each side, layering them to make it look fuller. Okay, so I'm really liking how it's looking so far. Next, I'll be adding some of these faux baby's breath and some berries. So I'm just placing them here and there, hot gluing them down wherever I think they look good, and this will add a really nice pop of contrast to the green. I want to add a bow on top, and I wanted it to be a little bigger than a simple bow. I'm using the super cute velvet ribbon, and there's so many ways to make a bow, but this is one of my favorites. I'm just gathering it in the center, making a loop, then gathering it again in the middle. You can totally add as many loops as you want, and I'm doing 3 on each side. By the way, let me know if you want me to do a video on different ways to make bows. I know there are tons of them out there, but if you're curious about the different ways I like to make them, let me know and I'd be happy to make a video on that just for you. So once that's done, I hot glue that right on top in the center. Now I decided to add a few more embellishments, more berries, and some pine cones. And then I just trimmed the ends of the ribbon to clean it up. To hang it, I'm just hot gluing a thinner velvet ribbon on the back. You could totally poke holes and just string that jute string right back through, but I thought this looked way better. And we're done. For my next project, I'm giving a Dollar Tree book a Christmas makeover. I'll be using this super cute gift bag with reindeers and doves. How adorable is this pattern? I'm definitely drawn to the dark green gift bags. But with that said, I did pick out a few other beautiful patterns, which I didn't get to because of time, and I just wanted to get this video out to you. But if you want to see a part 2 of these gift bag DIYs, let me know in the comments and I'll make it happen. Okay, so I'm cutting out the amount of paper that I need for the book. I'll be cutting it out so that I have 2 pieces, the front and the back of the gift bag, and I'm trimming out the sides, which I'll be using in a bit. Now I'm making sure that the height is tall enough so that I have a couple of extra inches at the top and bottom when the book is placed on top. And I'm just trimming off some of that creased bottom. Next, I'll be gluing the 2 rectangles together using school glue. I'm just running a line of glue along the back edge of one of the papers and attaching the other to it like so. The image doesn't match up perfectly, but that's totally fine because we'll be covering that up later. Now I place a book right on top, close to the center. I want that glued seam to be in the bottom of the book when turned over and not on the side. I'm also trimming off the thick part of the paper along the side to keep things neat. I did want the flaps to be a little longer when folded in, but you can also trim them down to the length you prefer. I'm creasing the paper in the top and the bottom using the book as a guide so I know how much to fold in, and then I fold the two edges down. And then I just fold the flaps over the covers and I also crease it a bit. So this is the moment I realized I did not have the image exactly where I wanted it to be before cutting. I literally cut out the reindeer's heads, and you'll see it even more in a bit. I probably should have gone with less flap and more deer and dove in the center. Oh well, it's still a beautiful image and we're moving on. And finally, I'm sliding the book covers into the flaps, starting with the back cover. And that goes in beautifully. I'm just making sure to push that in as far as it can go. And I do the same thing with the front, carefully sliding the cover in. And thank goodness those flaps lined up perfectly. I'm going to add a little contrast by using the side of the gift bag with a different pattern, and I'll be applying it along the side of the book, and it'll wrap around a bit on the front and back for some extra detail and a nice pop of design. So I trim it to the exact height of the book. I really don't want to fold down any edges, just so there's no bulges and it lays flat. There's a crease in the center, which I'll fit towards the bottom edge of the side of the book. Now you can trim the paper to the length you want showing on the front and back of the book. And I'm actually going to let the back spill over a little bit longer. To attach it, I'm just using some school glue and working in sections, making sure I glue all the edges down so it doesn't lift. And that's it for this one. A simple and fun way to give any book a Christmas makeover. And the best part is that nothing is glued directly to the book, so you can easily switch it up and change it anytime. For this next one, I grabbed another one of Dollar Tree's buffalo check ornament. I'm going to swap out that pine decor on top. So I went ahead and I removed it. It wasn't easy though. It was really stuck on there and I actually had to cut around it and under it, but I got it out. I'm also going to replace the jute with this red twine. And so that's what I do first. I wrap that around the box. And then I place a couple of these greenery leaves with berries right on top. And then I place a couple of these pine needles on top as well. I thought it needed a few more leaves and berries, and so I snipped off a few more, and I'll also be gluing in some small pine cones. So I place the leaves right next to the other greenery, and I glue a couple pine cones in the middle. And this one's done. So beautiful and rustic. For these two ornaments, I had planned to replace the decor on the reindeer and add some bows and greenery around the reindeer and tree, but you know what? Sometimes less is more. I actually love the reindeer just as it is without all that extra stuff, and the silhouette of the tree is perfect on its own, and they look amazing alongside your decor on any tier tray. For this project, I'll be using a couple of Dollar Tree's cylinder vases. The large one is $3, and I'm going to be decorating them with this beautiful gold leaf decals from Dollar Tree. These are really beautiful. Aside from that gold design, I love that the sticky area is transparent. So just carefully peel off one of the stems. It is quite sticky, and I just lay that vertically kind of at an angle on the smaller vase. It does help to press down in the center first, and then press out towards the leaf and just smooth out any bubbles. So yeah, I like how that looks so far. Now to make it easier to peel, which I forgot to do earlier, I remove that liner that surrounds the decal. And this will make it a lot easier to remove that decal. And I can place about 2 stems on the smaller vase, and so I place a second one on the opposite side, a little bit higher, closer to the top, and also at an angle. For the larger vase, I do the same thing, but this time I'm angling it a little more, just so I'll have a little more space because I want to put all 4 up. But you know what? After sticking that first one on, I actually really liked how that looked just like that. So you can definitely leave it just like that and place the Dollar Tree's pillar candle inside. Okay, continuing on. So now I'm on the second pack. I'm just placing that second stem on the opposite side where I put the first, so it goes all around the vase, angling it up a little more just so it looks like it's winding upwards. For the last 2, I thought I would place it starting from the top, facing downwards this time. And I thought it fit together nicely positioning it this way. So just make sure to smooth it all out. This is perfect for fall and can definitely last all the way through Christmas. For this DIY, I grabbed a couple of Dollar Tree's tabletop Christmas decor. I'll be using 2 for this project. So I just take them out of the box. It comes with a little stand, which is nice, and I fluff out the branches. Now these are really cute. I love that they have these, but no matter how much you fluff the branches on its own, it just looks really empty, but it is a great foundation though. So to make the tree look more full, I'm going to join 2 trees together using this wired garland tie from Dollar Tree to attach them together. So I just wrap those on the spaces in between the branches, which helps it look a little more full. But after looking at it, it looked a bit messy. It kind of just all blended together, so I decided to switch it out with these wired Canadian pine stems instead. These are from Hobby Lobby and they came in a pack of 20. I think it looked a lot better and more natural. Now the bristles have a very plastic artificial look, so a couple options. You can dab on some white paint to mimic snow. I love doing that, but for this one I'm going to add some gold instead. And I'll be using this metallic gold paint from Faux in the shade Pure Gold, and this will help soften that plasticky artificial shine. So I'm just using a little brush and I'm dabbing that gold all over the branches. Some areas a little more than others, varying the intensity. But I do want to make sure the gold hits every branch. So some areas I'm just lightly dabbing it and others I'm painting it on. I'm going to go over that Canadian pine in the center with some metallic espresso paint, very lightly, just to kind of mimic the trunk of a tree. Next, I'm going to take some more of that Canadian pine and I'm going to measure and cut them to the different lengths of the tree branches. Then I'm going to group 3 of them together, all different sizes, and then tie the ends with some floral wire and turning them into like little picks, which I'll be placing in the branches to give it more volume. So I'm just going to vary the size of the picks, keeping in mind how short the branches are on top. To match the gold of the tree, I'm going to do the same thing with a Canadian pine and dab on some of that metallic paint in the shade Pure Gold. I'm really loving how the gold looks on the pine. It really adds a nice dimension to it. Before placing them in the tree, I wanted the tree to stand upright first, and so I decided to use this little glass bowl with some white marble stones to add some weight and keep it from toppling. You can also use a little terracotta pot and some floral foam as well. So I'm going to start off by pouring some of the rocks in a cup. I thought it would be easier pouring it this way. I place the tree in the bowl and then I pour the rocks inside as well, surrounding the bottom of the tree, and this held it up pretty well. I'm going to wrap the bowl with some burlap. It's cut so that it's large enough just to cover the bowl. So I place the tree right on top in the center. And then I pull up the corners, bunching it just right under the branches, and then I just tie it together with some jute string. And then I adjust it, flipping down the corners like so. Next, I just pop in those little pine picks that I made, spreading them out until I like how it looks. Now, I really didn't want to add too much to the trees, just some berries here and there, but you can certainly fill it up with ornaments or string some beads all around. And this DIY is done. For this DIY, I'll be using this wood slice hanger from Dollar Tree and this beautiful poinsettia napkin from Dollar Tree. I'm going to Mod Podge the napkin onto the wood. So first I remove the hanger and the staples. I pour some Mod Podge over the wood slice and I just use a brush to apply that on all over, making sure it gets right on the edge. And then I set that aside to dry completely. I'm going to trim the part of the napkin design that I want to use, so I just use a small paintbrush and I dip that in some water, and then I outline the image. Next, I gently tear away the excess napkin. To create a softer wispy edge, I grab a small wooden stick, a popsicle stick works too, and I delicately trim the napkin's edges a little more, and this will give it a softer edge, blending the napkin nicely onto the wood. Since the napkin is 2-ply, I remove the extra layer on the bottom, and I place that and position that on top of the wood. By now the Mod Podge has completely dried. I place a piece of parchment paper on top, and then I just iron over that with my mini heat press in the lowest setting. If you don't have a heat press, you can use an iron, otherwise you can just place it right on top immediately after applying the Mod Podge. I just love this iron-on method because it leaves you with a smooth, wrinkle-free surface. I get a little sanding sheet and I sand down the edges to remove the excess napkin. Just look at how nicely the edge of the napkin blends with the wood. Now this part is optional, but I also lightly sand over the napkin just to make it look a little scratchy and distressed. I'm loving how it's looking so far. Then I just apply some more Mod Podge on top, and then I brush that on all over to seal the surface. Now I think you can leave it just like that, but I'm going to raise it up, and I'll be using a couple of these wooden blocks from Dollar Tree. I turn the wood slice over and I add some glue on the blocks, and then I glue them in place. And this quick, easy, and stunning DIY is done. For the next DIY, I grabbed one of these wooden Christmas DIY kits from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to be using the trees, and the rest I'll be saving for another project. I also grabbed these bamboo rings from Dollar Tree. They come in a pack of 2, and I'll be using the larger of the 2. I'll be painting the trees in the shade Moss from Waverly Chalk Paint. So I brushed that on all over the front of the trees. Since it's chalk paint, it does go on quite thick, so I do just about 1 coat of it. After it's dried, I place the ring on top of the trees, lining it so that it's centered or close to it. And then I just mark the bottom, and then I trim out the area that's sticking out outside the ring. Then I just add a little wood glue right on the bottom edge. And place the ring right on top of the trees, lining up the bottom. I also placed that piece of wood that was trimmed out on top, just so that the ring lies evenly. Before I add the string hanger, I wrap some white string on top, just a few inches in length, using a little hot glue to secure it in place. Then I add the string hanger, trimming off the excess. Now you can add some embellishments on top, but I love how clean and simple this looks. DIY, I'll be using this 7-inch pine wood frame with a white wooden background from Michaels. I'll also be using this Christmas greenery with snow from Dollar Tree. I want the greenery to fit inside, so I trim off some of the stems so that it fits nicely inside. And then I take some jute wire from Dollar Tree and I wrap that around the base like so. I snip off the excess, and then I add some hot glue on the back of the greenery, and I place that down towards the left of the frame. You could also wrap a small piece of burlap for the base as well, and I think that would have been really pretty also. I hot glue some pine cones onto the greenery, giving it that beautiful and rustic woodland charm. And then I hot glue a little black and white bow that I made using some Dollar Tree ribbon on top of the jute wire. I got these little wooden letters from Michaels, and I'm going to paint them in the shade Moss from Waverly, and it's going to spell out Joy to the World. Since the letters are small, I paint on the color with a fine brush. So to get an idea of spacing, I place the letters on the frame. As a guide, I place some tumbling tower blocks along the side and the base. And then I glue the letters down. And I'm using wood glue from Dollar Tree, and I'm just applying a very thin layer. The backboard of the frame is wood, so wood glue works perfectly. Once I'm done gluing the letters, I remove the tumbling blocks, and this beautiful and simple DIY is done. DIY is another quick one. I'll be using this beaded tassel from Dollar Tree. Now you can easily make this with some beads and jute string, or you can buy it already made for $8.25. On the other end of the tassel, I wanted to attach a nice little Christmas ornament, and so I headed to Dollar Tree. I picked out this adorable black and white ornament that says snow. I wanted to change up the embellishments on top. It's really not that bad, but I decided to replace it with some Christmas greenery that I thought looked a little better. And so I removed it and I just untwisted that wire that attached it to the ornament, and the whole thing came right out. I'm going to be using a couple of these Christmas stems. These are from Dollar Tree and I snip a few small pieces off. Then the only thing I didn't like about it was the glitter that was all over. Honestly, I tried my best to remove as much as I could. I used a small paintbrush and that worked pretty well. And so I just glued them on top. I ended up gluing back the bow that it came with, and then I added some little pine cones and berries, and these are from Hobby Lobby. For the tassel, I decided to wrap some red string to make the head, and I just used hot glue to secure that in place. And this quick and easy DIY is done. DIY. I'll be using this wood board from Hobby Lobby. It was 50% off and it ended up being under $2. It has a really nice feel and finish to it, which was awesome because it meant I didn't have to do anything to it. It was ready for crafting. I'll be using this beautiful nativity stencil and I thought it was perfect for the board. For paint, I'll be using this rich black chalk paint from Faux. So I place the stencil on top and I secure it with some painter's tape. So I apply the chalk paint, dabbing out the excess paint on the brush, then stenciling in circular motions. Now there were some indentations or grooves in the wood, and so I just pounced the brush over those areas until it was covered. Once I was done, I removed the stencil. The silhouette is so beautiful. Now I do love it just like that, but you can also add some embellishments on top, like some greenery and pine cones. I decided to change out the jute hanger for some ribbon as well. And this beautiful DIY is done. DIY, I'll be using some giant craft sticks and this hanging wall shelf from Dollar Tree. I really only need the wood part, so I will save the rest of the accessories for another project. First, I'm going to warm up the wood, and I'm going to mix territorial beige and khaki, thinned out with a little bit of water. So I apply that on with a rag on top as well as on the sides, and then I just wipe out any excess paint so that you can see the wood underneath. Acrylic paint does dry pretty fast, so I try not to let it sit too long before wiping it down. I'm going to use some of that leftover decorative paper from the previous DIY, and I'm only going to need about 5 inches of it. I'm going to Mod Podge that towards the bottom, so I apply a thin layer of the Mod Podge about the size of the paper, but also making sure to extend a bit beyond that. Once that's dried, I'm going to adhere the paper on top, but before I do that, I'm going to trim down these giant popsicle sticks to the width of the wood. So I just line the popsicle sticks and I place the wood right on top to measure the amount I need to trim off. Then I place a paper right on top of the dried Mod Podge, and I place some parchment paper on top. And with a low heat setting, I iron over the parchment paper, which will heat up the Mod Podge and make it tacky. To seal, you just do the same process on top of the decorative paper, and now you have a wrinkle-free Mod Podge paper. I'm going to do some gold leafing on the popsicle sticks, and I'll be using the Speedball metal leaf adhesive and imitation gold leaf that I got on Amazon. So I just apply a thin layer of the adhesive on top of the popsicle sticks, and I'm just doing one side. After that, I'm going to give it about 20 minutes to dry or until it gets completely tacky. Then I pull out a sheet of the imitation gold leaf and I flip it over the popsicle sticks to stick them on top of the gold leaf, and I can get about 3 on each of the sheet. I smooth it out a bit and then I just gently brush out the excess gold leaf. Now, since it's not real gold, you will need to seal it because it can tarnish over time. I like to use a glossy sealer because if you do matte, it will dull down the color. And then I just hot glue them down. I glue one on the bottom to cover up the holes. I turn over the wood and then I glue down the remaining 3 spaced out evenly while also making sure to cover up the edge of the paper. And since the popsicle sticks are a bit curved, I make sure to hold down the popsicle sticks for a bit so that it dries flat. I use my Cricut to cut out Joy to the World, and I'll be placing that on that open area. I love how simple it is, but you can definitely place a little wreath on top as well. I really love the gold detail and I didn't want to cover it up. And this DIY is done. For the final DIY, I'll be using this pine garland wreath from Dollar Tree. And to give it a nice little update, I'm going to dab on some white chalk paint with a paintbrush to create a snowy effect. So the trick to make it look like snow naturally fell on top, I just vary the way I brush on the paint. Some areas I go heavy with the paint and others I just lightly dab it on. I also grabbed this mini metal Christmas tree collar from Dollar Tree. I really love the red color. I'll also be using this wood round that have some beads along the edge from Dollar Tree as well. And this is going to make the base of the Christmas centerpiece bowl that I'm going to make. So I placed a wreath on top of that. And on top of that, I placed the red metal collar, flipping it over so the wide side is up. You can embellish this however you want. I'm going to add some berries and just place them all around. I started off by trimming out some of the berries from this Dollar Tree berry bouquet. I thought it looked nice, but then I ended up changing my mind with the berries that I trimmed out, and I decided to use these berry picks from Hobby Lobby instead, and I just placed that all around the bottom. I wanted to add some of these LED pillar candles, and I thought it would look adorable to stack them on top of these wood slices, but whatever you put inside is going to look amazing, and I just love how this one turned out. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, will you please give it a thumbs up? Make sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so that you don't miss any of my new videos. Until next time,